The morning began with a woman dressed for the future she had spent years imagining. Her hair was arranged, her veil secured, and flowers rested in her hands. Guests filled the venue. Music moved through the room, and the man she loved waited at the end of the aisle. She walked toward him, exchanged vows, signed the legal documents, and smiled for the photographs. Nothing about the ceremony suggested that it would be the last day of her life. Within roughly 24 hours, the bride had vanished. She had not checked into a honeymoon suite, wandered away with friends, or gone to sleep beside her new husband. She had disappeared entirely, and the husband who had just married her claimed he had no idea where she had gone. Before the wedding, she was known as a devoted daughter, a loyal sister, and the friend people could depend on without question. Those who knew her described the same qualities repeatedly: warmth, reliability, generosity, and an instinct for showing up when somebody needed help. She remembered birthdays, returned phone calls, and made troubled friends feel supported rather than burdensome. Her life had been built gradually. She held a job that mattered to her, maintained a small but trusted group of friends, and remained closely connected to a family that loved her despite its ordinary complications. She had not rushed into marriage. The relationship had developed over time, and when she introduced her partner to her relatives, their initial caution slowly faded. He appeared stable, committed, and capable of giving her the secure life families hope for their loved ones. The couple became engaged after approximately 2 years together. She accepted the proposal immediately. Wedding preparations brought the predictable strain: arguments about the guest list, extended conversations over money, and disagreements that seemed manageable at the time. Later, those moments would be reconsidered through the distortion of hindsight. Details that once appeared insignificant would acquire a darker meaning after she disappeared. On the morning of the wedding, she rose early with the expected mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She worried about the ceremony, the vows, and the emotional weight of promising a lifetime in front of everyone she loved. While her hair and makeup were completed, she laughed with the bridesmaids and drank champagne. At one point, she joked that another glass might make her cry before reaching the church. When she finally put on the dress and faced the mirror, the women around her saw a radiant bride. She appeared happy. She walked down the aisle, made the commitment, and became a wife. The reception took place at the same venue, in a room adjoining the ceremony space. Dinner was served, speeches were delivered, and dancing continued through the evening. Guests recalled a lively, emotional celebration. The bride moved from table to table, embraced relatives and friends, and held her husband's hand during their first dance. Yet sometime after dinner, subtle changes appeared. Nothing dramatic announced itself. A few attendees later remembered that she seemed quieter than expected. At one point, she went outside and remained away longer than a brief break would require. When she returned, her smile was still in place, but it seemed less natural, as though the expression had become something she was maintaining rather than feeling. Near the end of the reception, the maid of honor pulled her aside and asked whether everything was all right. The bride answered that she was fine. She blamed exhaustion and said the long day had caught up with her. She suggested that rest at the hotel would make her feel better. That was the last substantial conversation anyone could later recall having with her. After 11 p.m., she left the reception. The precise departure time and the circumstances surrounding it remained disputed. One point, however, was consistent. She did not tell her new husband, alert her relatives, or say goodbye to the guests still inside. She walked away from the celebration and did not return. Her husband realized she was missing around midnight. At first, he assumed she had stepped outside, gone to the restroom, or become involved in a lengthy conversation elsewhere in the venue. He checked the obvious locations and sent a text message. There was no reply. He called, reached voicemail, and tried again with the same result. By then, staff members were dismantling the reception area. Guests were leaving, and the parking lot was gradually emptying. Nobody could identify the moment she walked out. That distinction became important. People had not necessarily seen her leave, but they had also failed to notice her departure. Digital evidence later showed that her phone had been shut down at approximately 11:15 p.m., about 45 minutes before her husband said he realized she was gone. The device had not merely lost service or run out of power. It had been deliberately powered off. Her vehicle remained in the venue parking lot. There was no rideshare record, no bank card activity, and no indication that she had passed the exterior security camera covering the main entrance during the relevant period. She had been present at the wedding, and then the available trail stopped. Shortly after 1 a.m., the husband called her parents. He later claimed he attempted to sound calm and avoid alarming them. He suggested that she may have needed time alone or might have driven somewhere to clear her thoughts. But the explanation conflicted with the most obvious fact. Her car had not moved. At 1:47 a.m., her mother contacted police. Investigators began with the standard steps. They reviewed the available surveillance footage, searched the venue and nearby areas, and interviewed the husband, members of the wedding party, and event employees. Their early accounts were broadly similar. The bride had seemed happy. She had appeared normal. Nobody had observed an obvious confrontation or witnessed her departure. But her disappearance itself contradicted the image of an ordinary wedding night. The first significant inconsistency involved the phone. It had been switched off at 11:15, well before the husband reported noticing her absence. If she had simply gone outside for fresh air, carrying the phone would have been natural. If she had intended to leave voluntarily, disabling it would have been a deliberate choice. And if the action was deliberate, investigators had to consider whether she had made that decision herself or whether somebody else had done it for her. The second problem emerged from renewed witness interviews. When detectives returned to the guests and demanded more precise recollections, the portrait of the cheerful bride began to change. One attendee recalled seeing her engaged in a quiet but tense conversation near the back of the reception hall approximately an hour before she disappeared. The witness could not hear the words or identify the other person, but the bride's expression had seemed strained rather than celebratory. The third line of inquiry led directly to the marriage. The husband cooperated with investigators. He appeared distressed, answered questions, and offered a statement without obvious resistance. But cooperation did not prove innocence, and his account contained omissions. People close to the couple acknowledged that the relationship had not been as peaceful as it looked in public. The arguments were reportedly more severe than ordinary marital disagreements. They could erupt suddenly and had, on some occasions, become physical. Injuries had been visible but explainable, the kind of marks that could be dismissed individually even while forming a pattern collectively. The bride had mentioned the problems to her maid of honor. She minimized them, describing the incidents as unusual and claiming that the relationship was improving. She did not explicitly say she was afraid, but investigators discovered that approximately 3 weeks before the wedding, she had contacted a domestic violence resource line. The call lasted 11 minutes. She did not leave the relationship. She did not tell her parents. 3 weeks later, she walked down the aisle and married the same man. That decision could appear inexplicable to anyone viewing the situation from a distance, but fear, attachment, financial concerns, shame, and hope often exist simultaneously in abusive relationships. The call itself did not explain every choice she made, but it established that serious concerns existed before the ceremony. Then, 9 days after the wedding, a truck driver traveling along a rural highway roughly 400 miles away pulled over and discovered a body. The road was remote and rarely used except by locals attempting to avoid the interstate. A woman had been placed in a drainage ditch set back from the shoulder. She was still wearing her wedding dress. The clothing was not ripped, scattered, or visibly disturbed. Her body had been positioned carefully. That detail immediately separated the scene from a hurried disposal. Whoever left her there had taken time to arrange her. There were no obvious signs that a vehicle had violently left the roadway, and no indication that the body had been abandoned in a moment of panic. The location was 412 miles from the wedding venue, where she had celebrated with her new husband less than 10 days earlier. Her wedding ring remained on her finger. The complete medical findings were not released for several weeks, but the eventual cause of death contradicted the most obvious assumptions. She had not been shot. She had not died from blunt force trauma. The fatal method was poisoning. The substance was slow-acting and would not necessarily produce dramatic symptoms immediately. During a reception, its effects could have been mistaken for fatigue, emotional strain, or the consequences of a long day. A bride becoming quiet, stepping outside, or appearing unwell would not automatically trigger alarm. The medical timeline indicated that the poison had been administered during the reception itself. It entered her system while speeches were being made, the cake was being served, and guests celebrated what they believed was the beginning of a marriage. Someone at that wedding had poisoned her. Afterward, her body had been transported across 4 state lines and placed in a roadside ditch while she remained in the dress from the ceremony. The investigation expanded into a multi-agency case requiring a dedicated task force and tip line. Detectives began with the wedding guest list. 214 people had attended. Each person was interviewed. Alibis were examined. Relationships were cataloged, and connections to both the bride and groom were investigated. That process revealed the first major breach in the husband's story. 12 guests shared a connection that had not been disclosed during the initial inquiry. Their link involved business dealings, money, and a network of financial arrangements tied not to the couple jointly, but to the groom himself. Financial investigators began tracing records. The results altered the entire case. The husband's identity was false. The name he had used when meeting the bride and the name listed on the marriage certificate were not the name recorded at his birth. His employment existed, but the way he had represented it was fraudulent. Even the apartment the couple shared had been rented using a third name connected to an identity assembled over several years. Investigators were no longer examining a man with a concealed secret. They were examining a person who appeared to have constructed an alternate identity deliberately. The central questions became why he had done it, how many people were aware of it, and whether the bride had been selected rather than loved. 11 days after the body was discovered, the first arrest was made. It was not the husband. The suspect was a 43-year-old woman who had attended the wedding. She had occupied a seat in the third row during the ceremony, embraced the bride, and complimented her appearance. The seating chart identified her as a professional colleague of the groom. The bride had met her twice and considered her pleasant. That identity was false as well. The woman was not merely a co-worker, and she was not the husband's former spouse. She was his current wife. 7 years earlier, the two had married in a private ceremony in another state, and no divorce had ever taken place. She knew about his relationship with the bride. She knew about the engagement. She knew the wedding was going forward, yet she did not expose him or attempt to stop the ceremony. Instead, she attended. She sat among the guests and watched him marry another woman. During the reception, she gained access to the bride's drink. Investigators concluded that she placed the poison inside it, following a plan created jointly with the groom. The motive was financial. The bride possessed a trust fund created by her late father. She had not publicly discussed the money, and the account was scheduled to transfer fully into her name once she married. The value was approximately $2.4 million. The marriage placed the husband in line to benefit from the trust in the event of her death. Investigators determined that he and his existing wife had known about the money before he ever approached the bride. His introduction into her life had not been random. The courtship had not been an impulsive romance. The 2-year relationship had been an extended operation designed to earn her confidence, secure her family's approval, complete the marriage, and position him as the beneficiary. The bride had been treated as a financial asset. Once the first arrest exposed the conspiracy, additional evidence surfaced rapidly. Detectives obtained phone records, financial documents, hotel receipts, and records connected to a prepaid card used to acquire the poison found in the victim's system. The chemical purchase could be traced through an associate. The vehicle used to transport the body had been rented under the same false identity that began collapsing when federal databases were searched. Each supposed layer of protection created another record leading back to the defendants. The husband was arrested on a Thursday afternoon, 14 days after the wedding. He did not resist officers. He remained silent in the back of the law enforcement vehicle, staring through the window until his attorney arrived. He would offer little afterward. His wife, however, began speaking. Whether her cooperation came from remorse, fear, or self-preservation remained uncertain. What she provided was a detailed account of the conspiracy. She described when the plan began, how the bride had been selected, how the couple studied her finances, and how the husband developed the relationship through a carefully arranged sequence of trust-building steps. She explained what had been placed in the bride's glass during the reception. She described the movement of the body afterward and identified who had driven. Her account was delivered in a detached, almost administrative manner, as though she were reciting facts in a deposition rather than describing a murder. In exchange for testimony, she received a reduced sentence. The husband did not receive the same concession. The victim's family learned the truth in fragments and in the most painful possible order. First came confirmation that she was dead. Then came the financial motive. After that came the false identity. Only later did they learn that the man who had introduced himself to the family had been deceiving the bride from the beginning and was already married. Through the family's attorney, her mother released a statement explaining that her daughter had spent her life treating people with kindness, and that kindness had been exploited. She hoped that everyone in the courtroom would understand the magnitude of what had been taken. The statement was read during sentencing. The husband showed no visible reaction. The trust fund was frozen by court order immediately after the arrests. Although the money had technically transferred upon the marriage, extended litigation returned it to the estate. The funds were redistributed according to the late father's original instructions. Neither defendant received any of the $2.4 million. That was the family's first tangible victory before trial. The legal proceedings became lengthy and heavily contested. Defense attorneys challenged the forensic findings, the financial evidence, the chain connecting the defendants to the poison, and the credibility of the wife's testimony. The prosecution had to prove not only that the bride had been poisoned, but that the conspiracy had been organized by both defendants and that their actions had led directly to her death. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Both defendants were convicted on every count. The husband received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His wife was sentenced to 47 years. Neither sentence provided a realistic prospect of release. The bride had entered the ceremony believing the man at the end of the aisle represented a genuine future. She believed the relationship, the vows, and the life they were promising to build. The identity presented to her was manufactured, and the affection surrounding the marriage concealed a financial plan that had begun before the ceremony was even scheduled. But the defendants could not reduce her existence to the value of a trust account. They could not erase the people who loved her for her character rather than her money. They could not eliminate the years she spent caring for others, the friendships she maintained, or the place she held within her family. They also could not prevent the truth from being uncovered. The conspiracy was exposed, the body was recovered, the financial motive was documented, and both people responsible were forced to answer before a jury and the victim's family. The case was never truly about the groom's false identity, the secret marriage, the poisoned drink, or the fortune that attracted him. Those facts explain the crime, but they did not define the woman who died. She deserved to remove the wedding dress, wake up the next morning, and begin married life on her own terms. She deserved the ordinary future that had been promised to her. Instead, she was carried hundreds of miles away and left beside a rural road before she had been married for a full day. Her death exposed the danger of trusting appearances, the vulnerability created by financial secrecy, and the destructive consequences of a relationship engineered around deception. It also demonstrated that careful planning does not guarantee a perfect crime. False names leave records. Purchases create trails. Money moves through systems. Phones preserve connections. And conspirators eventually have to decide whether loyalty to one another is stronger than the instinct to save themselves. The defendants attempted to turn a marriage into a transaction. The court rejected that transaction and imposed sentences that ensured neither would return to the community. The bride's life, however, cannot be measured by the years stolen from her. She was more than a beneficiary, more than a newlywed, and more than the victim at the center of a financial conspiracy. She was a daughter, a friend, and a person whose kindness was exploited by people who mistook compassion for weakness. The wedding photographs preserved the last morning when she appeared exactly as happy as she had every right to be. The evidence preserved what happened afterward. And the convictions established that the people who planned her death could not hide behind invented names, staged affection, or a carefully arranged ceremony forever.